يا رب. طيب، أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم إلى نور الفهم، وأكرمنا بمعرفة العلم، وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. أما بعد, inshallah, we're going to be starting with our class for today. We did not have class last week. Last week we were supposed to discuss the two remaining types of salah before Salat al-Janaza, which is the Salat al-Khawf and Salat al-Istisqa, the rain prayers and also the fear prayers. But we didn't have class because of the weather. So what I'm going to do is, because I still want to finish this next Tuesday. I want to finish this course next Tuesday so that we could use the last Tuesday before Ramadan to talk about fiqh of fasting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the class on Salat al-Istisqa and Salat al-Khawf virtually. We're going to stream it bidnillah. We'll announce when the day and time is going to be. But I'm not going to delay this class for that. If you want, you could watch that later on your own, because we need at least 2 classes to finish what's pertaining to Salat al-Janaza, because it has a number of parts to it. So today we're going to be going over the funeral prayers part 1, and next Tuesday we'll finish the chapter on the funeral prayers part 2, and then for Salat al-Khawf and Salat al-Istisqa virtually, as I said. And then on March 5, our intention is to do a quick rundown of Ahkam al-Siyam in preparation for Ramadan, because March 5 is the last Tuesday before Ramadan. So that's the plan, inshaAllah ta'ala, for today and the next 2 weeks after. Okay? So if you have the book, I know a number of you may not have the book, but if you do have the book and you turn to Salat al-Janaza, he breaks, it's page 101, yes. He breaks down this section into 4 main subjects, right? And he says this in the Matan Abi Shuja', the one that we're covering, he says, وَيَلْزَمُ فِي الْمَيِّتِ أَرْبَعَةُ أَشْيَاء. There are 4 things that are due to the one who passes away. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us husn al-khatimah and to allow us to pass away upon iman. All of us are going to face it at a certain point. And when we do face it, the haqq of the believer goes back to these 4 things. You know, this dunya, however long is, it always remains short. And as they say, this dunya is mukaddara bil-zawal. You know, one of the things that taints this life is diminishment. Nothing in this dunya will ever remain, right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ, we mentioned the hadith before, حَقٌّ عَلَى اللَّهِ أَلَّا يَرْتَفِعَ شَيْءٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا وَضَعَهُ. Everything that goes up will come down. Someone healthy today, if not tomorrow or the day after, will eventually become ill. And they'll eventually leave this dunya. Or if they don't become ill, they may suddenly leave it with that. You know, and I guess in the beginning of this class, it's appropriate to say that, you know, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on one of the members of our community who was a member from a long, long time ago. Maybe some of you, if you've been around ICPC for a long time, would remember him. His brother Muhammad at-Turki. He was the caretaker of the masjid many, many years ago in ICPC Patterson. And he passed away, rahimahullah, yesterday in Turkey. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon him and elevate his status in Jannah. Allahumma ameen. But you know, this is the nature of dunya. You know, هذه الدنيا مهما طالت فهي قصيرة. It's short in relation to what's on the greater spectrum. So he says here, وَيَلْزَمُ فِي الْمَيِّتِ أَرْبَعَةُ أَشْيَاء. 4 things are necessary for the deceased. He says, غُسْلُهُ وَتَكْفِينُهُ وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَيْهِ وَدَفْنُهُ. These are the 4 things that are rights of the deceased. The first one is washing the deceased. The second one is shrouding the deceased. The third one is doing the janazah upon the deceased, and the fourth one is burying the deceased. And there are ahkam and rulings pertaining to every single one of these, And this all falls under the chapter on funerals, right? So, when the scholars go over this chapter, since these are the four things, this is Bidayat Rihlat al-Khulud, the eternal journey, right? It's the beginning of it. And in the beginning of this journey, there are certain things that are from the rights of the one who is muhtadir, adab al-muhtadir. The etiquettes of dealing with someone who's on their deathbed. Adab al-muhtadir. What should I say in his presence? What should I allow to be heard in his presence? How can I assist the one on their dying bed as they're leaving this dunya? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْتَفَّتِ السَّاقُ بِالسَّاقِ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْمَسَاقُ. There's a bridge between this dunya and the akhirah. What's this bridge called? Ihtidar. Right? What's this bridge between alam al-ghayb and alam al-shahada? We have alam al-ghayb, the unseen realm, right? Alam al-shahada, the observed reality. There is a bridge, qantara. You have to pass over this qantara. When is the person at this bridge? When they are in ihtidar. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to in وَالْتَفَّتِ السَّاقُ بِالسَّاقِ. The body is still functioning, but it's no longer fully there. Now the individual is starting to see elements of alam al-ghayb. That's why when someone who's on their dying bed, they start seeing things that those around him can't see, right? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the end of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, very, very beautiful verses about death. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَوْلَا إِن كُنْتُمْ غَيْرَ مَدِينِينَ تَرْجِعُونَهَا إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. If it wasn't that you're all indebted and you're all returning to Allah Azza wa Jal, you would bring this soul back into the body if you possibly could. In those verses in the end of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْكُمْ وَلَكِنْ لَا تُبْصِرُونَ. We are closer and nearer to the deceased, but you can't see. You can't see what's truly happening to this soul as it's getting ready and prepped to leave the body, right? And of course, for human beings, this is a very, very, it's a very big spiritual test, right? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to death in the Quran as musibatul maut. It's the calamity of the calamity of death. Why is it a calamity? Calamity for who? It's a calamity for us as those who are still living, because it's something that causes us a great deal of fear when we think of the idea of death, But inshallah, for the deceased, it's not a calamity. It's not a musibah. But it's a big test, even for the deceased, and that's why there's verses in the Quran that state that when the person is experiencing death, the angels come to him. تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ أَلَّا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Is death something that should cause fear? Yeah, from a human aspect, yes, it does cause fear. Why? Because من طبيعة البشر أن يخافوا المجهول. It's human beings, this is our nature. We are afraid of the unknown. The idea of the unknown is something that is, it triggers a lot of anxiety and emotions for the believer. And that's why the believer needs the angels at those moments to come to him or her and say, right? لا تخاف لا تحزن. لو ما كان في داعي للخوف ولا داعي للحزن. Why would they need the angels? Why would they need? There's definitely a reason for fear, right? That's why the angels, they come and they say, don't be afraid, don't be sad. Why? Because again, the majhul, the unknown is something. And that's why one of the biggest tests for iman is what? Test of qadar, divine decree. Anyone here know what's waiting in their qadar tomorrow? No way. No way can anyone ever uncover what's awaiting in qadar tomorrow. We can't do that. So that's why it's a huge test. It's a big variable. It's an unknown. And for the believer, this strengthens me, doesn't weaken me. Yeah, I'm afraid, but it strengthens me. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said to us in the hadith, أكثروا من ذكري هادم اللذات. Frequent your remembrance of the destroyer of pleasures. And there's another hadith that says, this other hadith, speaking of death, right? It says this, استحيوا من الله حق الحياء. Have true modesty from Allah Azza wa Jal. What does it mean to have true modesty of Allah Azza wa Jal? The Prophet ﷺ explains. He says, ولكن من استحيا من الله حق الحياء فليحفظ الرأس وما وعى وليحفظ البطن وما حوى وليذكر الموت والبلاء ومن أراد الآخرة ترك زينة الدنيا ومن فعل ذلك فقد استحيا من الله حق الحياء. Prophet ﷺ says, if you want to have true modesty to Allah, you'll be mindful of what you allow to enter your mind. You'll be mindful of what you allow to find its way to your belly. And you'll frequent your remembrance of death and bila, right? Bila is when the body's going to wither, right? Everything in the body is going to wither. Nothing's going to remain. Nothing's going to remain. That's why when we're talking about the subject of death, we're speaking about something that is void of any concentration on materialism. That's why, the whole process of death, in our country over here, there are two very booming businesses that'll never, two booming industries that'll never collapse because people are willing to spend money like crazy on them. What are they in this country? The two big businesses: weddings and funerals. Weddings and funerals. People are willing to spend unreasonable amounts of money on these two things that make no sense. What other day in a person's life are they ever willing to spend over $10,000 on flowers that are going to be thrown away in a few hours? It's silly, foolish, but people do it anyway. 10,000, Allah, okay, just on flowers, right? And that's about weddings. And then about death, same thing in this country, it's a huge business. It doesn't cost $5,000 to bury someone. In this country, they create a funeral fund because the casket needs to look like this, cost like that. The stone needs to be made like this and of this design. And you might find that it doesn't cost $10,000, it might cost $20,000, might even cost more to bury someone in this country because it's made into a business. Even though حطام الدنيا لا تنفع الميت بشيء. All this stuff, no matter how big the tombstone, no matter how precious it is, no matter how expensive the funeral, it's not going to do anything for the person once their soul leaves the body. So, this journey through the kitab of al-janaiz is actually a very, very, very spiritual one. It emphasizes what truly matters in those moments. And that's why they start off with this introduction by mentioning this idea about death, the concept of death, and the hadith that are relevant to it. And there's many other hadiths that we can share about this, but I believe that this is sufficient, inshaAllah ta'ala. So when we come into explaining this section, the very first section that we go over is adab al-muhtadir, or al-muhtadar, right? So man hadarahu al-maut, and the one who is prepped for transitioning and leaving this dunya. How should I function in their presence? First off, they say that this mayyit, when it's really, really time, this mayyit should be placed facing towards the qibla. This is the first adab. They say, يُضْجَعِ الْمُحْتَضِرْ عَلَى جَنْبِهِ الْأَيْمَنِ إِلَى الْقِبْلَةِ. If I can face his chest towards the Qibla, I should do that. If they're in their home on their deathbed, or they're in the hospital on their deathbed, I should face them towards the Qibla. فإن تعذر, right? He says, ألقي على قفاه ووجهه وأخمصاه للقبلة. If I can't face his chest towards the Qibla, then the least I could do is make his feet face the Qibla and lift his head up a little bit, prop it up with a pillow, so that his face is facing towards the Qibla. One of these two, right? That's the first adab they say. And here, this is what they call al-idja', right? This is al-idja'. One of these two ways. Then, the second adab is al-talqeen. They say here, يندب تلقين المحتضر قبل الإضجاع أو أثناء الإضجاع بالشهادة وهي لا إله إلا الله وذلك بشكل لطيف وبدون إلحاح لئلا يضجر, because it's a very, very difficult moment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us thabat when that moment comes to us, if it comes to us like that. Sometimes we don't have ihtidar and the person is in a car and he gets in a car accident, split second, just dies. Khalas, that's it. But if the person is slowly dying away and they're on their deathbed, and we're there, it is recommended to do talqeen. And what does that mean? To say in the presence of the one who's dying, La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. But this should not be done aggressively. Why? Because it's tests. لِأَلَّا يَضَّجِّرُ الْمُحْتَضِرُ. So here, it should be said in their presence the word of dhikr. La ilaha illallah. وَلَا يُقَالُ لَهُ قُلْ بل يذكرها على مسمعه ليتذكر. That's what they say here. Don't say قل لا إله إلا الله. Why? Because this person, as they're dying, is not fully there. And they might react out of frustration by saying no, or say something negative. And this would be remembered negatively about this person. So one should not aggressively talk to the person who's on their deathbed and say this, do that. Say this. No, don't do that. Just say, put La ilaha illallah in their presence and let them be reminded to say it to themselves. And this is taken directly from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. لَقِّنُوا مَوْتَاكُمْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And there's another hadith that says, مَنْ كَانَ آخِرُ كَلَامِهِ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ. Whoever his last words was La ilaha illallah, will enter Jannah, inshaAllah. And besides this, in the presence of the mayyit, it should be a very, very spiritual mood. Should not be talking about dunya. Should not be laughter. Should not be distraction. Should not be lahu and la'ib. These are important adab. Very, very, very important adab. Anyone who has a family member who's passing away, don't allow in the presence of this person anything negative. No TV, no nothing at all. Right? Of course, you know, in those situations, the person's pure iman is going to come out. If the person was min ahl la ilaha illallah, min ahl al-dhikr, min ahl al-Quran, this person's going to want this and is going to feel soothed and comforted by this. Sometimes there's stories, wal-'iyadhu billah, of the person on their very last moments, they don't want to hear any dhikr. They want to listen to music. They want something awful, something of lahu and la'ib. And sometimes this ghafla that is in the presence of the mayyit at the time of ihtidar is also following the mayyit to the graveyard. You'd see this as so absurd. How could anyone do this? But it happens in many janazat. That the people are around the grave and they're laughing, they're joking, sometimes smoking, sometimes talking about business, sometimes talking about يعني ذلك ومن يعظم شعائر الله فإنها من تقوى القلوب. It's a sign that there's no taqwa in the heart. If even when I'm seeing someone's lifeless body being put in the ground, I'm having a cigarette and I'm talking about some foolish nonsense of dunya while that is happening. Death is a big reminder, right? You know, look at this. In the beginning of Surah Al-Mulk, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ. Why is maut mentioned first? This is one of the lata'if in the Quran. Why is death mentioned first in this ayah? Al-mawta wal-haya. Why? Because al-ibtila أظهر وأبلغ في الموت منه في الحياة. The idea of death strikes more as a trial for a person than thinking of life, right? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, سبحان الذي قهر عباده بالموت. Death brings to mind Allah's attribute al-Qahhar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has subdued all of His creation by the reality of death. Death is something that I need to approach with a lot of spirituality. Another recommendation that they have, as from Adab al-Muhtadir, is to read in the presence of the Muhtadir Quran. And among the surahs, and some people are not going to like this, but again, it's the books of our fuqaha. اللي مش عاجبه كلام الفقهاء حر. The fuqaha mention this to us. The fuqaha say, يندب أن يقرأ عند المحتضر سورة ياسين. It is one of the recommendations is to recite Surah Yasin in the presence of the one who's passing away. Why? There's a hadith that is weak. It's weak. But it is min fada'il al-a'mal. The hadith says that the Prophet ﷺ says, اقرأوا على موتاكم ياسين. لأنه ذكر فيه أحوال القيامة والبعث فإذا قرأت عنده تجدد له ذكر تلك الأحوال. So they say here, the reason why Surah Yasin is recommended to be recited in the presence of the deceased is because the content of the surah. What's the content of Surah Yasin? If you read it, it speaks about the Day of Judgment, it speaks about resurrection, and it speaks about a lot of spiritual meanings. So that's why they encouraged reciting in it Surah Yasin. And again, it's a weak hadith. And again, even though it's a weak hadith, not all the scholars have agreed to its weakness. It's reported in Abu Dawood, and Abu Dawood did not say it was a weak hadith. Ibn Majah, it's also reported in Bayhaqi and Musnad Imam Ahmad and Al-Mustadrak fil Hakim, by Al-Hakim in Al-Mustadrak. And that's why the scholars recommend it. The other thing that's recommended for the deceased is تذكيره بحسن الظن بالله عز وجل. يستحب للمسلم عامة والمريض خاصة أن يكون حسن الظن بالله تعالى. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged us that when we're on our deathbeds, we should have a lot of husn dhan, good assumptions of Allah. That's the time, you should always have good assumptions of Allah. But especially when you're dying. Why? Because the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he says, لا يموتن أحدكم إلا وهو يحسن الظن بالله عز وجل. None of you should pass away except that he's having good assumptions in Allah Azza wa Jal at the time of death. Right? So, and there's another hadith Qudsi, it's very well known, أنا عند حسن ظن عبدي بي. I am according to the good assumptions of my servant of me. So, at the time of death, we should not allow the deceased to feel afraid in any way. And we should not mention anything that would trigger his fears and his anxieties. Right? We should mention the things that inspire hope. Reading the ayat about Jannah, about Allah's rahmah, about His maghfirah. These are the ayat that should be recited in the presence of al-muhtadir. And that's why they say here, وَلِذَلِكَ يُسَنُّ لِمَنْ عِنْدَ الْمَرِيضِ وَالْمُحْتَضِرِ أَنْ يُذَكِّرَهُ بِحُسْنِ الظَّنِّ بِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَأَنْ يَكُونَ طَامِعًا فِي رَحْمَتِهِ وَإِذَا رَأَى مِنْهُ أَمَارَاتِ الْيَأْسِ وَالْقُنُوطِ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ التَّذْكِيرِ. So if you see anything that shows that this person who's passing away is depressed, is weak in his himmah and his strength and willpower, it is obligatory that you say something that will lift up their motivation at that time. They say that among the things that are necessary من آداب المحتضر ينبغي للمريض أن يحرص على تحسين خلقه وأن يتجنب المخاصمة والمنازعة والاشتغال في أمور الدنيا وأن يستعد للقاء الله تعالى. This is a reminder for every one of us. When your time comes, what should you do? What should you do when your time comes? If you had conflicts with people, forgive everybody. Forgive everybody. Don't allow anything in dunya to get between you and the highest levels. If you find yourself on your deathbed and you had a problem with your brother, ask to see your brother and say, I forgive you. Ask to see your sister, your mother, your father, your whoever is there that you could possibly reconcile with. Leave no conflicts, right, behind at the time. And at that time, khalas, it should not be the time for any matters of dunya. Now, even they say that when the person is marid marad al-maut, when the person's on their deathbed, their financial decisions are restricted, by the way. Sometimes some people, they illicitly try to maneuver. This happens, unfortunately. People find themselves feuding and fighting over wills and mirath and things like that. At the time of death, the son, daughter, or someone else very close to the deceased illicitly tries to write up a will and get the deceased to sign it right away before he passes away. This is haram. La yajuz. And this hukum la yanfudh. When the person is marid marad al-maut, they say that his tasarrufat maliya la tanfudh illa bi thuluthi malih. The individual cannot make financial decisions when they're on their deathbed except with what's in the bounds of a third of their estate. Why? Because that's the amount that they have to make a decision for their wasiyah. Maximum, as the Prophet ﷺ said, الثلث والثلث كثير. If the person, say if the mayyit was to write a wasiyah, or someone was to write a wasiyah and get the mayyit to sign it while they're in the hospital, that the whole inheritance is for my son fulan, or for my boys and not for my girls. Is this wasiyah mu'tabara shar'an? Anything that is in the inheritance that is mukhalif li shar'illah, inshaAllah, the mayyit was fully aware, or halaf, or kada, doesn't, هذا الكلام لاغي لا اعتبار له. Even if Allah will give power to this type of will that is notarized with something that is against the deen. If someone takes, imagine this, like say if I get something that I'm not deserving of from the tariqah, like I was my parents' beloved, and because of this, they X'd out all of my other siblings and they gave their whole inheritance to me. If I take this money, I am taking mal haram. And I am doing something, as the Quran says, أَكْلْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ. I am falsely consuming the wealth of others, and this wealth is unlawful wealth. Even if my mother and my father swore it to me, this is for you. We love you, we hate everyone else, right? That's the example. We love you, we hate everyone else. Everyone else abandoned us, we don't want them to get a dime. Will this count? No. So, يستحب أو ينبغي للمريض أن يحرص على تحسين خلقه وأن يجتنب المخاصمة والمنازع والاشتغال في أمور الدنيا وأن يستعد للقاء الله. It is time to prepare for death, and it is the time to make sure that all your agreements, your covenants, everything is in place. They say that should happen at that time. وَأَوْفُوا بِالْعَهْدِ إِنَّ الْعَهْدَ كَانَ مَسْئُولًا. That the individual fulfills all responsibilities before they pass away. Those are the main things that they have for adab al-muhtadir. Then, what happens after the person passes away? What happens after the person passes away? What should we do? This is now adab lil-mayyit fawra wafatih. What are the etiquettes that need to be followed as soon as someone passes away? They say, يتحقق الموت بخروج الروح عن الجسد وتوقف نبضات القلب. This is right now when I confirm that the person has indeed passed away. After that, I do the following. وهذه الآداب هي, first, what are these etiquettes? The first, تغميض العينين. يندب تغميض عينيه لئلا يقبح منظره. So here, باستمرار فتحهما وشخوصهما. So he says here, the first thing you should do is close the eyes. Close the eyes of the deceased. As soon as they pass away and we're confirmed that the person passed away, you close the eyelids like that, so that the appearance of the deceased is not appalling, and so that it's not disturbing. And this is something that's reported in the hadith. دخل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على أبي سلمة وقد شق بصره فأغمضه. And here the Abu Salama, his eyes were motioned upwards. You know, they say, why do the eyes of the deceased move around when he's passing away? They say that there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim, it says this actually, that the soul, when it's taken from the body, the eyes follow it, right? The eyes are now, khalas, that's it. The last thing that's, because when the soul is being taken from the body, it's slowly being stripped from different parts of the body. And the last thing for it to be taken from is the head. And the last thing that the deceased could do is move those eyes. So those eyes move around and are not clearly in place, as you see in many instances, not all instances, is because the eyes are looking at the soul as it's emerging from the body. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith. So here he says, إِنَّ الرُّوحَ إِذَا قُبِضَ تَبِعَهُ الْبَصَرُ. When the individual's soul is taken out, the eyes follow it and stay looking in his direction. ويستحسن أن يقول حال إغماضه بسم الله وعلى ملة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. What should you say when you're closing the eyes? Bismillah, and upon the way of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. Then, what would they do immediately after that? They say the second adab for the mayyit is شد اللحيين, or اللحيين, right? So, شد اللحيين. They would normally have one strap of cloth that they would put under the chin, and they would knot on the top of the head. Why? And that's so that the mouth doesn't stay open, right? This is so the mouth doesn't stay open. It stays closed, and anything that's going to emerge from the deceased, it doesn't stay coming out of the mouth. No odors, no rotting, no decaying, nothing would be smelled from the mouth area, right? So that's shadd al-lahyayn. What are the lahyayn? They're the two jawbones. That's what al-lahyayn are. And the lihya, the beard, is that which is growing on the two jawbones. They are the lahyayn. So the hair growing on them was referred to as a lihya, a beard, right? The next one, the next etiquette from adab al-mayyit, right? Adab lil-mayyit is talyin al-mafasil. What happens soon after passing away, the body's warm, right? Still warm with life. That's how they say, you know, after some time it starts becoming cold, right? It's not going to stay warm. It was warm because of the blood flow and the circulation in the body. But once the person dies, the body goes cold, and what? Rigor mortis starts setting in. You guys know what rigor mortis is? That means khalas, the person's limbs, because there's no circulation, the muscles are no longer going to stay tender. So after some time, it's going to be very difficult to move the person's joints, right? So they say يندب تليين المفاصل بأن يرد الساعد على العضد ثم يرده ثانية, right? By doing this is how I do تليين المفاصل. And the same thing with the legs. I would bend the legs inwards towards the back of the thigh, and then I'd bring it back out so that I could keep it layyin, right? So that it could be easier to wash. ليسهل غسله لأن حرارة الجسم لا تزال باقية بعد الموت فإذا تم تليين المفاصل والأعضاء لانت وإلا صلب عودها وصعب تليينها بعد ذلك. Rigor mortis will set in, right? الوضع على السرير. This is the fourth etiquette of dealing with someone who is deceased, right? To place them on a cushion, some type of cushion, some type of bed, some type of bedding. يندب وضع الميت فور وفاته على سرير أو لوح أو شيء مرتفع لئلا يتأثر برطوبة الأرض فيتغير بنداوتها, so that we don't want this body to quickly corrupt, right? So we want to keep it propped up, flat, so that it doesn't quickly begin to rot. And you got to think, of course, back in the day, they did not have fridges. They did not have a lot of the things that we have today to preserve the deceased for a longer period of time. Imagine that if someone was to pass away in the middle of the night, and we need to wait hours until we can get them to the place where they are to be washed, and then wash them after that, and then wait hours more until the janazah comes. Sometimes when this would happen in a person's house, the mayyit may stay overnight in the house until they're taken to where they need to be taken to be buried. The fifth one, so this is again al-wad'u ala al-sarir, right? The fifth one is istiqbal al-qibla. Again, we love the qibla. We always are cognizant and aware of the direction of prayer. We honor the direction of prayer. They say, يستحب توجيه الميت ليكون مستقبل القبلة. We want to make him towards the direction of prayers, just like we did for the muhtadir. And then here they add to that, ويوضع على بطنه شيء ثقيل. They also are going to place something heavy, relatively heavy, on the stomach of the deceased. لئلا ينتفخ فيقبح منظره. Again, subhanAllah, this body, it quickly starts deteriorating after the person passes away. These are all spiritual reminders. So they say that they would normally put something heavy on the stomach of the deceased so that the body does not bloat and become swollen. And that's from a hadith. It's an athar. لما قال أنس رضي الله عنه لما مات مولى له ضعوا على بطنه حديدة لئلا ينتفخ. So this is out of respect for the deceased. The other thing is نزع الثياب. This is the next etiquette for the deceased, is to remove the clothes of dunya. That's it. There's no need for them. Doesn't matter how you remove them. You cut them, they're going to be disposed of. No one's going to want to wear these clothes ever again after that. The problem is that the clothes, and often what happens, especially if there was something in the stomach of the deceased, is because, again, naz'u ruh is a taxing thing on the body. What happens for the deceased a lot of the times is that you'll find excrements, urine, fadalat, filth, come out from the stomach, from the person's stool when they pass away, because there's some pressure being exerted when the soul is leaving the body. And sometimes, and that's going to happen initially then, and then if this stomach was full, again, it happens. What if the deceased had just eaten before he passed away? If their stomach was full, it's going to happen slowly. It's going to even happen when we talk about washing the body. We're going to learn that it's of the sunnah to press very, very hard down on the stomach, downwards, so that whatever is remaining in the stomach and in the GI tract comes out from the person's body. Right? نزع الثياب يندب نزع ثياب الميت المخيطة التي مات فيها لئلا يسرع إليه الفساد. We need to remove those clothings. The only exception is who? Is Shaheed al-Ma'raka. We're going to talk about the martyr. How do we deal with the martyr who passes away? What are the types of martyrs? And how do we deal with the martyrs when they pass away? Shaheed al-Ma'raka. We're going to talk about Shaheed al-Ma'raka, inshallah. So here we have نزع الثياب. Then we have ستر البدن. This is a very, very important etiquette for the person who passed away. The body cannot be exposed and should not be exposed, and the body should not be accessible to anyone who wants to see it very easily until it's fully clothed and taken care of. So ستر البدن. يندب ستر جميع بدن الميت بثوب إن لم يكن محرما بحج أو عمرة. The only exception to this is the one who passes away in Hajj or Umrah. The person who passes away in Hajj or Umrah, treated differently. They stay in the libas of ihram, as we learn from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The person who passes away in Hajj or Umrah will come on the day of judgment. Will be resurrected. يُبْعَثُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ مُلَبِّيًا. They will come on the day of judgment and they'll be doing talbiyah. So they're going to stay in libas al-ihram, right? So that's about the Hajj or the Mu'tamir. And here he says وَيُنْدَبُ أَنْ يَكُونَ الثَّوْبُ خَفِيفًا لِأَلَّا يحميه فيسرع إليه الفساد. Again, we don't want this deceased to be in a hot area. We want to preserve it in a cool area. Now what we do is we preserve in the fridge until it's time to bury it. All right. So this is the seventh etiquette, ستر البدن. The eighth one is قضاء الدين. The eighth one is قضاء الدين. ويندب الإسراع إلى قضاء ديون الميت للتوصل إلى إبراء ذمته منه. Now, this is something so critical for the deceased. As soon as he passes away, what it is of the sunnah to do is to seek the repayment of all this person's debts. Why? They're going to be affected by this debt in their grave. The Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, نفس المؤمن معلقة بدينه حتى يقضى عنه. The Muslim soul will be hung and withheld, hung back, barred from experiencing the na'im of Hayat al-Barzakh until the dain and the debts are paid off, right? There's another hadith, it's scarier. The Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, يُغْفَرُ لِلشَّهِيدِ كُلُّ ذَنْبٍ إِلَّا الدَّيْنِ. Even the shaheed, the most noble death you could possibly imagine, dying as a shaheed, a martyr. Everything could be forgiven for the shaheed except one thing, the debts that are owed to people. Even that the shaheed is going to be asked about and is not going to be experiencing the na'im until it's paid off. وَالْمَنْدُوبُ هُوَ الْإِسْرَاعُ بِقَضَاءِ الدَّيْنِ أَمَّا قَضَاءِ الدَّيْنِ لاحقا فهو واجب. Of course, debts need to be paid off. But what we're talking about here is something that's highly encouraged, is to rush to pay them off as soon as this person passes away. Because, of course, we will never distribute an estate without having paid off the debts that are due first. This is when we talk about mirath. Before we get to mirath, we need to go through several layers. What are the things that we go through before we get to mirath? First thing we go over is nafaqat al-tajheez, the cost to bury this person. That is deducted from the money they leave behind. Unless someone wants to pay it. If someone wants to pay it, then they could go ahead and pay it. But first thing, nafaqat al-tajheez. The second thing that is due after that is ad-duyun. And these duyun, these debts that are owed, are two types. Debts that are owed to Allah. What's an example of a debt that's owed to Allah? Zakah is one. What's another one? Financial. That's an example of a debt that's owed to people, not to Allah. What is it? That's a debt owed to Allah? What do you mean intentions? Nadhr? Did you say nadhr? Oh, like vows. Yeah, that would fall under that, yes. What's a big one? It's one of Arkan al-Islam. Hajj. If the person passed away and he didn't do Hajj, this is min ad-duyun al-muta'alliqa billah azza wa jal. So before we get to this person's tariqah, this person didn't do Hajj. Before any of his heirs get a single dime, we're going to put aside the money that is going to be for this person's Hajj, right? And they have no say about this. It's not their choice. If this person had to do Hajj and didn't, then the first thing we're going to put aside is this. If they had to do Hajj and they didn't, what do you mean if they had to do Hajj? Meaning that if the requirement of Hajj applied to them, they had the money and they had the istita'a and they didn't do Hajj, then we're going to take the money from that. All right. Then we have a duyun al-muta'alliqa bil-ibad. The heir has an option between making up the fast on their behalf or paying the fidya. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, that would be another financial thing. So fidya if it's needed. And then we have the debts that are owed to people. That's the debts that are owed to people. Which one comes first? Debts that are owed to Allah or debts that are owed to people? There's a difference of opinion about this. Some give preference. Why do we say what matters which one comes first? Because sometimes the person might not have enough money, right? The person left behind $10,000 and they owe $20,000 to people, plus they didn't do Hajj. The 10,000 might be enough to do Hajj, maybe, I don't know, once upon a time. Or maybe, I don't know. I don't know if you could do Hajj for $10,000 anymore. But anyway, maybe you can. We'll ask one of the Hajj companies. Anyway, the point is, what do? Do I pay off the 20, pay it towards the people, the creditors? Or do I do Hajj with it? There's a difference of opinion about this. Which one takes priority? Huququllah. And why is there a difference of opinion? Some scholars say Huququl Ibad. Why? Because Huququl Ibad mabniyatun ala al-mushahha wa Huququllahi mabniyatun ala al-musamaha. Allah's rights are based on forgiveness. Allah forgives. But the rights of people, that's based on accountability. So that's why some people say the rights of people first. But some of them say, no, Dainullahi ahaqqu bil qada. The rights of Allah are most due to be repaid. So we're going to put those first. So it's ikhtilaf bin ulama on this issue. Then we have, after the debt, so now what if the debts that are owed to people are not, the tarika, the estate is not enough for it, right? So this person owes 5 people. He owes one person $50,000, and he owes 3 people $10,000. How much do we got so far? 80. And then he owes one person $20,000. Mathalan, 100,000. Huh? Aish ad-din. Allah al-musta'an. So he owes this much amount of people. And all of the money that he has left is $50,000. You with me? You're with me? So $50,000 left. That's what he left behind. He owes one person $50,000. He owes 3 people $10,000 each. And then he owes one person $20,000. What are we going to do now? Who are we going to give this $50,000 to? Now here, we're going to distribute this $50,000 based on their ansibat, their shares. So the one that's owed $50,000, we're going to give him a percentage of what he's owed, but we're going to give him the highest percentage because he's owed the most, right? We're not going to give him the whole $50,000. What about the other guys, right? So he's going to get a portion, and then each person is going to get a relative portion, and then there's going to be nothing left for the waratha. Nothing. That's it, right? But anyway, I don't want to get too much into mirath. Inshallah, one day we can have an intensive just on ahkam al-mirath. But so you guys with me? Nafaqat al-tajheez, ad-duyun, that's number 2. So the cost for burial. Then we have the debts that are owed. Then the third one is what? Al-wasaya. This is the bequests, right? What are the bequests? So, Yeah, they're the debts owed to people. Yeah. She's asking about the deferred amount from the mahr. Like say, and what do you mean deferred amount? This is based on culture. Some cultures, they do an upfront amount and a deferred amount, right? 10 and 10 or 10, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, this deferred amount, if they stay married to the very end, and then he passes away, the wife is going to deserve this amount, and it's going to count as a debt from among the duyun. So she's like a creditor. She like with among the other creditors. So anyway, the third one is wasaya. So this person so I have an estate of $100,000. If I have this amount, I'm allowed to make my own personal choices in how much of this? 1/3. Which is $33,000. I make the choice how I want to use this money. What do you mean I have the choice? I can give it to whatever I want. I want to give it to someone who's not an heir, someone who's not going to inherit any money. Like who? Like my sibling, for example, if I have children. So if I have a son or a daughter, if I have children, if I have sons and daughters, what happens to hawash al-nasab, what happens to my siblings? They're not going to get a single thing. So, why? Because there's hajib. This is a lot of stuff relating to inheritance. But I have a very poor brother, and I want to leave some money for him, right? So then I could do this from the wasiyah. I could do it from the wasiyah, right? And there's a lot of, or mathalan, you know what? I want to give it as a charity to this masjid or that masjid, or to this good cause or that good cause. I want to give a charity, mathalan. So this is the third thing I go to. Then the fourth thing, what do I go to? I go to the tarika. This is where I distribute the inheritance after that. So we got through all of this. Why? Because we were talking about qada' ad-dayn. These are the four things relating to the tarika, the estate of the deceased. Right? You're all with me? You all got them? All clear in your mind? You wanted to ask something, Hajj? What do you mean? Yes? I do. I do. I have the choice. I could do whatever I want with it. Yes, I'm allowed. You know, it's my choice. He's saying if your children are in need, can I still give a wasiyah? Yeah, I can. I could do whatever I want with it. This is 1/3 only. الثلث والثلث كثير. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إنك أن تذر ورثتك أغنياء خير من أن تذرهم عالة يتكففون الناس. Prophet ﷺ said this. For you to leave your heirs behind, having their self-sufficiency is better than leaving them behind in need of asking people to help them. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ said. But it's your choice. You have up to 1/3. Yeah. So qada' ad-dayn, and then ad-du'a lil-mayyit. This is the last adab that's relating to the mayyit. الدعاء للميت يستحب للناس أن يقولوا عند الميت خيرا وأن يدعوا له. Say good things in the presence of the deceased and make a lot of dua for him. دخل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على أبي سلمة, as we said, وقد شق بصره فأغمضه ثم قال إن الروح إذا قبض تبعه البصر فضج ناس من أهله فقال لا تدعوا على أنفسكم إلا بخير فإن الملائكة يؤمنون على ما تقولون. ثم قال اللهم اغفر لأبي سلمة وارفع درجته في المهديين واخلفه في عقبه في الغابرين واغفر لنا وله يا رب العالمين وافسح له في قبره ونور له فيه. This is the Prophet ﷺ's dua. This hadith is in Sahih Muslim. What does it say? The Prophet ﷺ, when he entered on Abu Salama, by the way, Salama later became one of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. Salama became one of the wives of the Prophet. Abu Salama, when he passed away, Prophet ﷺ came in and he closed his eyes, and he said, when the soul comes out, the eyes follow. And the rest of the hadith goes on. The people began to make a ruckus. And this happens a lot, by the way. That's why at the time of death, one of the greatest adab is there should not be high levels of emotion, screaming, crying. It is totally against the sunnah. It's from fi'l al-jahiliyyah for people to start hitting their cheeks and ripping their clothing. And sometimes people go to the extent where they say things that are so displeasing to Allah Azza wa Jal, that I wish Allah takes my soul. Why did Allah do this to me? This isn't fair, and so on and so forth. Why did Allah wrong me by taking my mother, my father, my kada? This is all big haram for the person to do this, especially in the presence of, and look what the Prophet ﷺ said. Prophet ﷺ said, لا تدعوا على أنفسكم إلا بخير. Don't make any dua for yourself. Only make good dua for it. فإن الملائكة يؤمنون على ما تقول. Especially when the person is dying, in the presence of death, the angels, especially if the person was righteous, the angels are present. And they are doing ta'meen. They are saying ameen to your dua. So be very careful of the dua that you make in the presence of the deceased. So he says, and then he made dua, oh Allah forgive Abu Salama, and oh Allah raise his status. And he says, وَخْلُفْهُ فِي عَقِبِهِ فِي الْغَابِرِينَ, and bless his progeny, and forgive us and him, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and allow him, وَافْسَحْ لَهُ فِي قَبْرِهِ, and widen his grave, وَنَوِّرْ لَهُ فِي, and give him nur in his grave. This is the dua of the Prophet ﷺ for Abu Salama. Now, these are the things that are all relating to what happens soon after death. The main things that are remaining in this chapter are, how do you wash a person who passed away? غسل الميت. And what are the things that are relating to the janazah prayers, and how is burial done in Islam. These are the three subjects that are remaining, and I don't want to open one of them without being able to complete it. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask Allah Azza wa Jal to put barakah in the next class that we have, that we cover these three last things that are remaining. A lot of the details that were already covered in this part. Salat al-Janazah is very easy, very quick. It doesn't really take long to explain Salat al-Janazah. Where there will be some detail is in Ahkam Ghasl al-Mayyit. So we will finish next time, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, what remains from this chapter. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts and gives us tawfiq and understanding. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. You have a question? What's your question? Well, Malaikat al-Rahmah, the angels of mercy, are going to be present at the Muslim's death. And Malaikat al-Adhab, angels of punishment, are going to be in the presence of the dying non-Muslim. Someone who works in hospitals and is around death a lot, do a lot of dhikr in your hospital, because you're always around. The angels are always visiting the hospitals. The angels visit the hospitals more than the human beings visit the hospitals. We just can't see them. And they don't need any visitors passes to get in. SubhanAllah. All right? What's up? How do you pay back a hajj? What do you mean? The heirs agree to designate somebody to do hajj on their behalf. Either one of the sons or someone who's a stranger, whoever it is. They need to agree to somebody to do hajj on behalf of the deceased. Yes. If the loaner forgives the loan, if the lender, the creditor forgives the loan, you do not need to pay back it. Khalas, that's it. The person forgive it. So it's all good.